where you can sort of see each other being
Okay. That's all right. That's all right.
Because when I was working, and I worked until quite late, it was always the weekends and family times. We always
Well, this is for the show. It's not further.
and when I've been to see anybody, and I come back, well, I think that's
No, we need a faculty for all that. I think that's a bit much for our purposes. Yeah.
that's a one-off.
Sure. Yeah. Right. The same Thanks, Robert. We'll get started in a minute. I think Richard's got the kettle on, so if you want a cup of coffee, I think Richard's taking orders. And welcome to people online as well. If you've got questions about Etheldreda and Ely, leave them in the comments and we'll pick them up. We'll get started in a moment.
Very cathedral, and the market was going on while I was there. They had sheep inside there. Yeah, there was some sheep and some little cage. All things look really like, yeah, that well, it looked more like a cage, I'm sorry. It is, but yeah, there was straw.
Joan, do you want a cup of coffee?
Is it got milk in it?
I'll put milk in it for you.
No, I don't want milk.
Oh, okay, that's a black one. And this one is for the vicar, wherever he is.
I have.
I've got colds, I think you don't tell anyone because they'll be making suggestions. No, I wouldn't have slept well last night, did we?
No, you kept making it.
Have you got one-to-ones?
No.
Is that the sort of
So I think it's also yesterday. No.
Is that your flu jab?
Yeah. So it's also and hot, cold, raging over 3 weeks ago.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, I wasn't well after I had it. It made my arm ache and made me feel
undone. But it's one treatment, socks and one treatment. Yeah, it's one up on your feet.
Oh, right.
Leave it open on.
So it's, thank you. Of course, it goes to the I know the name of the not a Friday morning.
Never mind the workers.
I didn't know anything about it.
Are you going to make one yourself?
Anybody else? Do you want one of these, Joan?
I can't see.
Okay, that's all right.
Thank you very much on the same.
Yes, dear. No sugar.
So it's written on florals. Honestly, it's
I'll sit next to you, Joe.
Well, good morning again, and we'll just talk for about no more than 20 minutes, half an hour, about Etheldreda and Ely. But if you do have questions in the meantime, do stop me, interrupt, and put your hand up, that's right. And as I said, if you've got comments, questions online as well, do leave those in the comments. Wendy will pick those up. I keep saying we're going to visit Etheldreda rather than visit Ely. And for me, a pilgrimage is about a place and about a special place, but a place that's been made special because of the people who have prayed there, witnessed there, and led their lives there. And so it's a pilgrimage to the shrine of Etheldreda as much as a pilgrimage to Ely. And so we're here to learn about the life of Etheldreda, really, as much as the history of Ely as a place. Etheldreda, if you look inside that leaflet, there's a timeline, and I'll just talk through the timeline and expand on some of those points. Etheldreda was one of the most famous early saints, and certainly the most famous and widely venerated female saint from before the Reformation, really. She was born in the 7th century and really venerated from that time onward. And we know a lot about her because she was so popular and so many people wrote about her. So she was born in about 636 in Exning, near Newmarket. Exning was a royal palace at that point. It was the furthest extent, really, of the kingdom of East Anglia. So King Abbess of East Anglia controlled the territory from Newmarket to the Suffolk coast. And there's a more famous royal palace at Rendlesham, and there's the tombs of the kings at Sutton Hoo, a lot of royal activity on that side of East Anglia. But it's less well known that there was a royal palace at Exning as well, really as a defensive post, looking inwards, looking inland to the other tribes who controlled land, inland. Because as soon as you get to Burwell, just north of Newmarket, you're in Fenland, and that was impassable for King Annas. That was flooded, that was that was only navigable by boat. So Newmarket in Exning was really a strategic post on the edge of the Kingdom of East Anglia. And that is where Etheldreda was born, probably the eldest sister of a number of siblings, many of whom also turn up in the story, and many of whom were also venerated as saintly. Sexburger was the next in line, somebody else, Ethelwald? No, that's a man. I can't remember all these names. Wendreda is another one. We're not entirely sure whether they're all sisters or cousins or exactly how they're related, but they're all part of the same family. And they all end up leading exemplary Christian lives. Etheldreda herself is first married off to Tonbert, a local chieftain. He was a chieftain of one of the Fenland tribes. So this was a local alliance. And you can see here King Annas is trying to curry favour with some of the local tribes and allows his daughter to be married off. But she maintains her virginity. She doesn't consummate the marriage. And that's because she's really just there as a political offering from King Annas. Whether she even goes to live with Tonbert is in question. She's really there just as a political exchange. But in return, Tonbert does give to her, as her dowry, as her marriage gift, the Isle of Eli. And that's the first time Ely turns up in this story. So Ely at that time was an island. I said the fens were flooded. Ely itself is on a slight hill. You can still see that when we go there, that the cathedral is raised up on the hill. And so that was an island, and it was given to Etheldreda for her own possession as a marriage gift from Tonbert, this local chieftain, chief of the Gideons, the tribe of the Fens. She doesn't spend long in Tonbert's possession, and it was in his possession really, as I say. He dies 3 years later, and Etheldreda is then married off to King Ecgfrith of Northumbria. And you can see King Annas' political liaisons are spreading further afield now, because instead of a local chieftain who's got some Fenland tribes under his control, he's now trying to curry favour with the King of Northumbria. And Northumbria extends right down to York, really, by that point. It's a lot bigger than we think of Northumbria today. So Etheldreda moves north, spends time at Hexham, in the abbey there, spends time in various places. But again, Ecgfrith is actually quite young at this point when she's married to him. So again, she doesn't go to live with him straight away. She's his possession, really, and women were thought of in that way. But refuses to consummate the marriage again. And that's a deliberate statement on her part to say she doesn't want to be a part of this political matchmaking. She's not there, it's not a marriage of love, she's just there as a possession of the king. And she says that's not a game I want to play, that's not a life I want to lead. So she spends a lot of time in the abbeys around that location. So she spends time at Hexham in particular. When she is released from her marriage vows, she goes to Coldringham, which is in the Scottish borders. And that abbey is run by her aunt, so she has family connections up there as well. But she's using these religious foundations, religious locations, as a place to retreat, as a place to escape this political life that is trying to be written for her, but she's refusing. She's good friends with the Archbishop of York, and he is the one who releases her from her marriage vows, and Egfrith and the Archbishop therefore don't get on, and Egfrith is particularly cross that the Archbishop of York keeps protecting Etheldreda. And I think this is a moment in English history when the place of the church and the place of the political life is really in question, because the bishops in England don't have a huge amount of power compared to on the continent, where the bishops have quite a lot of political power. In England, the bishops don't tend to exert that power. It's still warring kings and chieftains. But they're starting to amass greater territory. The big kingdoms of Northumbria and Mercia are beginning to emerge, and therefore the kings are starting to use the church to exert political control as well. And you can see here the Archbishop of York resisting that a little bit and refusing to be drawn into politics and trying to keep the church distinct. And Etheldreda's story is very much tied up with that as well. So Etheldreda is released from her marriage vows. She finds her way eventually back to Ely, which I said was her possession. And there she founds her own monastery. So having had this experience up in the north of living in abbeys amongst those in religious orders, she founds her own monastery. It's a double monastery, which means it's for men and for women, referred to as a double monastery because they're essentially side by side. The men and the women don't live together, although they're under the same authority and they would have worshipped together occasionally. They're on the same site, but the men and the women's living quarters were entirely separate. But it's a double monastery for men and for women, for monks and nuns. And Etheldreda is its first abbess. So she's learnt how to run the monastery from particularly her aunt at Coldringham. And so she sets up her own, and she is established as its first abbess. And she's got that commission from the Archbishop of York to do this. And even right at the start, the monastery flourishes. And it attracts people to live there and to work there and worship there. The monastery is a place of retreat. It's distinct from the political life, but it's not entirely separate from the work of secular life. The monastery was run as a business. It would have had its own crafts and trades. It would have helped to produce food and sold food to the local population. So it was a place of work. You weren't going there for a rest, a retreat in that sense, but it was certainly a place of retreat from the political life that was going on around the rest of England. When Etheldreda dies, she is interred in a simple coffin. She leaves instructions that it must be a very simple funeral, a simple burial. She doesn't want to be venerated. She doesn't want to be remembered above anybody else for her work. And that, I think, is one of the particular hallmarks of the saintly life, that the saint refuses that honour, certainly during her own life. We know quite a lot about Etheldreda from Bede, who wrote a history of the English Church, and he's got a couple of chapters on Etheldreda. And as a sign of her humility, I copied out a passage from Bede on the back of your little handout, which says that she never wore linen, she only ever wore woolen garments. She would seldom wash in hot water, except on the eve of the greater festivals, such as Easter, Pentecost and Epiphany. I don't know, I think the point there is that she seldom washes in hot water. She doesn't not wash. She washes in cold water on the other day. She seldom has more than one meal a day, again, except for the greater festivals, or under urgent necessity. She remains in prayer in the church from the hour of matins until dawn, unless prevented by some serious illness. Matins was at about midnight, and you'd go and pray matins and then go to sleep until dawn. So this is saying that she didn't have that period of sleep. She'd often be up praying during the night. And she was ill towards the end of her life. She had a tumour on her neck towards the end of her life, but Bede, not in this passage, but Bede also talks about her bearing that illness with great fortitude and refusing to complain and continuing her duties and her prayer. So Bede paints this image of a humble character, a character committed to her life of prayer and service. A life, I think, that's been worked on and built throughout her time, as I say, refusing the political life that was arranged for her and being drawn to this life of prayer and service. Her sister, Sexburger, succeeds her. She is the next abbess. She's also had a similar experience, that she was married off to the King of Kent, the Prince of Kent, but retreats into the monastery, one of the monasteries in Kent, and then comes back to Ely to succeed Etheldreda and continue on that good work that Etheldreda had begun. But it's Sexburger who wants to honour Etheldreda's life and begins to talk about her in terms of being a saint. She exhumes Etheldreda's body. She digs up the body from the simple burial place, and it's found to be incorrupt. We're 16 years later or so, and the body has not decayed. And again, that is a sign of saintliness, of God saying that this person is worthy of continued remembrance and continued praise because of the glory that she gave to God. So we're not praising Etheldreda in her own right, but because of what she did for God and how she helps us to bring us to God. So she is, the body is taken back into the Abbey church, into the centre of worship of the church, put in an elaborate tomb that the nuns happened to find in Grantchester. Sexburger sends them out to go and find a suitable tomb, and they turn up in Grantchester, just outside Cambridge, and they find a beautiful marble tomb and say, that will do, and God has obviously pointed us in that direction. And they take this marble tomb back to Ely and put Etheldreda in it, and it's the centre of worship for the Abbey. And so in return for that veneration, what the Abbey are hoping is that Etheldreda's prayers will continue, and that her legacy will continue in blessing the Abbey and blessing the work of the Abbey. The history of religion in England then waxes and wanes, and various people come and go, and religious establishments like Ely, their fortune goes up and down. The Abbey's raided in the 9th century by Danish invaders who were Christian but didn't appreciate the religious foundation of the Abbey. But then in the 10th century, when there's more influence from the Norman side and from the French side, there's a big revival in the religious life. And so the Abbey, like many others in England, is refounded as a Benedictine community according to the rule of St. Benedict. And that legacy really has continued right down to the present day, that the prayer, the daily prayer that Benedict encourages in his communities has really set the tone for the life of cathedrals up and down the country. since. The abbey, after the 10th century, goes from fortune to fortune. It's the building that we see today, and it's huge. Ely Cathedral is big. Was begun in 1081. So the abbey that we see today dates from 1081. And you think of the craftsmanship and the work required to build a building of that size. When we go in there, you'll appreciate just how long, how tall, how big that the building is. That was done in the 11th century, without any of the tools and machinery that we would use today. So it's an impressive feat. And throughout that period, Etheldreda is at the heart of that building and continues to be at the heart of the prayer life of the building. That changes at the Reformation. The English Reformation is an interesting time in English history. It's a time of change. It's a time of change in the relationship between the church and the state, and the two are drawn closer together. It's not necessarily the time of destruction that it's remembered for. The cathedral continues. The prior of the community becomes the dean of the cathedral, and the abbot becomes the bishop. So their names have changed, but their roles haven't really. There's still a school, which is now called the King's School instead of the Monk's School, and the King's School in Ely is still there. There's, instead of a religious chapter, there's a chapter of canons. So the life of the cathedral continues. They've just got different names, and the king is in charge instead of the Pope. So the Reformation is a time of change, but not necessarily the time of destruction and removal that it's remembered for. Actually, the person who did a lot more damage to the fabric of the building was Oliver Cromwell, who came that little bit later. And Cromwell was well known in Ely, and there's a museum to Cromwell in Cromwell's house in Ely. Ely was affiliated to Cromwell and his armies, and so a lot of the religious life and the building of the cathedral was changed at that time, when the practices like the veneration of the saints disappeared, and England became a much more overtly Protestant country. And so it's at that time that Etheldreda and her body and her tomb disappear, and Ely is no longer this centre of pilgrimage in the way that it had been, because Etheldreda has gone and her body has gone. When the tomb is destroyed and the body disposed of, the story goes that a soldier cut off her hand and hid her hand in a house in Sussex, in Arundel, one of the houses on the Arundel estate in Sussex. And this would have been a Catholic, somebody who wanted to maintain that tradition of venerating the saints. And wanted to preserve something of the relics of Etheldreda for that to continue. And it was hidden in a house in Sussex, and a lot of houses, Catholic houses, that wanted to remain true to the Catholic faith as they saw it, and maintain masses and have priests officiating, had what they called priests' holes, little cupboards and hiding spaces that if the authorities came to inspect them, they would hide the priest in the priest's hole and say, no, we haven't got a priest around here. And so the Catholic life continued in families' houses like that. And in this priest's hole in the house on the Arundel estate was also kept the hand of Etheldreda. So one of the relics of Etheldreda survived. It turned up in 1811, and by this time you're allowed to be a Catholic in England again. So in 1811, the hand turns up, is given to the Duke of Norfolk, of all people, to look after, and he entrusts it to some Dominican sisters to look after, and it spends some time in the Dominican house in Stone. And then the Dominicans give it to, they first give it to Saint Etheldreda's church in London. Now in London, just near Covent Garden, there's a square called Ely Place. And St Etheldreda's church on Ely Place was the bishop's residence in London. So the Bishop of Ely used to have a house in London because he would frequently have to go to London and go to Parliament, and so would have a house in London that he spent time in. And that house continued in the possession of those who were favourable to the Catholic life rather than Anglican life. And so that house in Ely Place in London is now a Roman Catholic church, and they were given the hand of Etheldreda. So it moved out of Anglican possession, the possession of the Church of England, into this Catholic house in Arundel, was given to the Dominican sisters and then to this Roman Catholic church in Ely Place. And finally, in 1953, they give it to the Roman Catholic Church in Ely. And so Etheldreda's hand, at least, makes its way back to Ely. And we will go to the Roman Catholic Church first, that's why we're going there first. And you will see the hand preserved at an altar in the Roman Catholic Church in Ely. So it's still there, and it is still there to be venerated. And when it turned up in 1811, there were various people saying, well, this isn't original, this could be anybody's hand. But the casket that it was in was dated, and the wood was from the Reformation period. The inscription on it, all the texts on it looked like it was from the Reformation period. So it looks authentic as far as anybody can tell. This hand at least dates back to when the tomb was destroyed in the Reformation period, and therefore could well be Etheldreda's hand. Even if it's not, we're going there to take part in this story of Christian witness and worship throughout the ages. And we're still reminded of that division, that the hand is in the Roman Catholic Church when the cathedral continued the work of the religious community. And so in many ways it's a great sadness, to my mind, that there are two different churches and two different traditions, but that's the reality we're in. In the cathedral itself, there is now a stone which marks the original site of the tomb that was destroyed. There is an acknowledgement that the shrine was there in front of the high altar, and so you'll see that in the cathedral. And of course, when we go tomorrow, we can visit the shrine in the Roman Catholic Church, but we can't worship there. We're Anglicans. We've got to go to the cathedral for our Eucharist and for the benediction. So in some ways it's a sadness that there's still that division. And I hope that the story hasn't finished. The shrine will continue to be used, people will continue to visit it for prayer. And for the first time this August, the priest from the Roman Catholic Church celebrated the Eucharist at the shrine in the cathedral. And so that work of reconciliation, I think, is ongoing, and I hope will continue. So that's the story of Etheldreda and her veneration at Ely.
Thank you, Alex.
Were there any questions?
When my husband bought our house in Rentham, just outside Southwold, it was
Yes.
the most dilapidated thatched cottage, quite a big one you ever did see. And he said, "Oh, what do you think?" And I said, "Oh, really?" And he said, "It's got promise." So it turned out to have been the original part of the house was built in 1540, and the farmer who had it had sectioned off various bits of the house, so the his labourers
Yes.
could each have and we found a peaceful.
Gosh.
And then, of course, English Heritage came down, and after that we couldn't move a thing without them saying, yes, you may do this, or yes, you may do that. But it was fascinating. So it's
There you go.
at the time.
Yeah, that was the right time. Yeah. The Reformation. Excellent. Well, those who are coming tomorrow, we will meet here. If you haven't got other arrangements, we'll meet here at 9:30 to allocate cars and things. But I think other people have made their own arrangements. Wendy, you're going straight there.
I'll go by Cambridge.
Yes. Excellent. And I think Richard's organised his. Lovely. And if you're watching from Newmarket, we'll join with lots of you tomorrow as well. And there'll be another dozen or so people joining us from Newmarket tomorrow. So it'll be a good group, I think, when we get there.
Do we pay to go into the cathedral? Because when I was there in the summer, we had to pay.
Tourists pay to get into the cathedral. Those who are coming for worship don't. So, no, we're there for worship, we're there for prayer. That does mean if you'd like to leave a donation to the work of the cathedral, that would be very much appreciated. But no, if you're going for prayer, you don't pay. And in fact, if you turn up at the cathedral and say, I'm here for a particular reason and I want to pray, they should let you know. Equally, the cathedral needs to generate income, and it's taken that decision that it will charge tourists. It does get a considerable number of tourists for entry.
That's cute.
Yeah. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you tomorrow.
Have a good day tomorrow. Where is cars going?